G'day guys, Mac with the Hour Circle, and today we're going to be talking about the Adeptus Custodes and the Talons of the Emperor in this episode of Getting Started in the Horus Heresy. So, how do you tackle Custodes? Well, you've got a bit of a conundrum. First, you have two totally different forces jarringly smashed together into one list, being the Custodes and the Sisters of Silence. The two are like water and oil, and we all know that pouring water and oil together doesn't really work. They don't really cover up for each other's weaknesses, as you think they might, because there is nothing that the other side does better. And I know that sounds silly, but the Sisters are basically a horde army, to some extent. They're very much like the Solar Auxilia. You have an elite faction with good weapon skill, ballistic skill, decent armor, some cool tech. But there is nothing that they really bring to the table unless you buy them in sort of quantity that makes them worth taking with Custodes, and vice versa. The Custodes are such an elite formation, and putting them into a Sisters of Silence army just eats up a lot of points. So I don't know, it's a really funny thing, and I think the best way to cover it is to do them as two separate halves, and then maybe down the line, look at doing them as a single combined army list. And frankly, part of this problem is also my own, because I think they are two distinct factions that have been forced together and should be separated. But it is what it is. So, another thing that has to be tackled is the fact that the Custodes are blatantly overpowered in 30k. They shit on everyone else. They are so much better in every conceivable way that it's not funny, and the points are completely imbalanced and their war gear is too powerful. Now, some might say, that's fine, they're an elite faction, they're allowed that. I say, they're an elite faction, but they have to be points priced correctly to compensate for their increased abilities, which they're not. They're, frankly, overpowered. So, I think the best way to do a getting started list is to break it down to basics. What isn't a dick list? What is a nice list for Custodes? What is something that if you play it, people aren't going to groan and roll their eyes and look at you and go, oh, not another Custode player. Because that's what people think. I mean, you're dreaming if you don't think that everyone else playing 30k thinks that when they see a Custodes army. Because they're everywhere and they all have the same things in them. So, let's get away from that. Let's have some fun here. Let's build a light Custode list. Light and polite, we'll call it. So, first things first, a couple of interesting rules that Custodes have that inform how you play. First, preternatural skill. Now, this rule almost always is in effect. It's crazy, but essentially, if you have a higher average weapon skill than the enemy's average weapon skill, then you get +1 initiative, which is pretty much everything because you're a very high weapon skill army. Unless you're facing like Sol Astartes characters, then your weapon skill is going to be higher. So you're always going to be fighting it. Increased initiative is basically the best way to look at it. The Sodality. A Custodian unit actually has a 3-inch coherency, so you can spread your shit out more, which means that blasts and templates directed at you, which are often the deadliest weapons against Custodes, things like Demolisher Cannons, struggle to hit more than one model when they're fired at you, because you can spread your units out so that only one model, if the template is placed on the center of them, can actually be hit by it. It is crazy what a 3-inch spread does to a unit compared to a 2-inch. On top of that, you can always use your usual leadership for regrouping, which is the same as Astartes. There's nothing special about that. You also have Inviolable Psyche. Essentially, Forge World's trying to do and they shall know no fear, but without actually saying it. What happens is you're immune to fear, you're immune to pinning, and you ignore all penalties when taking morale checks, very similar to Stubborn. On top of this, you also get rerolls of Deny the Witch. Why? Even Psychers don't have rerolls and Deny the Witch, but Custodes do because they're the golden child. Quite literally. Also, every model in the army is bulky. Now, this is obviously Custodes, not the Sisters of Silence. Keep that in mind. But it does limit you when you're hopping in transports in how many miniatures you can put in, because do remember, all of your miniatures basically count as 2. On top of that, every model is a character. Now, this is interesting because models in the unit can actually look out surf one another. So, Custodes players who are trying to cheese it can actually look out sir wounds off one another. Yeah, since they all have 2 wounds each, that's a good way of making the unit last longer rather than removing whole models. But almost nobody plays it that way because Custodes players often know they're on thin ice anyway playing this list. You don't want to piss off the other person you're playing too much. And lastly, they also have Crusader, which is strong because they're an elite faction. But apart from that, that's really the only rules you need to know about. From there, it's a matter of, well, selecting units. So let's look at that now. There are 2 flavours of HQ option available to you. 3 if you want to go for Constantin Veldor's model, which is not a model I like, which is one of the many reasons I won't suggest it. There is the Forge World Legio Custodes Shield Captain. There is also the Games Workshop Captain General Trajan Valorous. If you want to build your army in plastic, the Games Workshop one's the way to go. If you prefer the resin touch, Forge World's the way to go. Completely up to you, because war gear wise, they're pretty much identical. Both have essentially what you could call a Paragon Spear in 30k. It's basic. If you want to convert them though, that's totally in your court. Personally, I suggest the Solarite Gauntlet as the most bang for your buck out of your HQ, and you get a Power Fist that's not unwieldy, and it's AP1. And I think it's also mastercrafted, so that gives you someone that punches at strength 10, so very good at killing dreadnoughts and vehicles. Vehicles and dreadnoughts are 2 things that Custodes sort of have trouble with, so there's something to, having those fists around occasionally makes very worthwhile. Then, elites. The Legio Custode Aquilon Terminators, I think, are a great choice. Personally, I think the Infernus Firepikes are the best choice for them. Now, again, this is a unit which is not fantastic. Any Legion player would kill for a unit this good, but in a Custodes army, they're just middle of the road, mediocre. That's fine. Taking options like this in your army shows that you're not out there trying to win at all costs. That you're taking some fluffy options and trying to spread around a bit of the love. The usual temptation for people is to go for Sagittario Guard, which are all armed with Paragon weapons potentially, which is just broken. Or to go for things like the jet bikes. And of course, well, they're a toughness 6 Custode, and it's just cheese to the max on a jet bike. So, that's what you got to keep in mind. There's always going to be a give and take in the Horus Heresy of people who are pissed at Custodes players for the mere fact that they exist and have an overpowered army. But there's also those of us who realise that, hey, maybe this person just enjoys Custodes. They shouldn't be penalised for it. If they want to play their games, they can. But, by that same token, don't come at us with, all the nastiest stuff you've handpicked for your force. Try and make it a bit of a pleasant experience if you can. And personally, I think Aquilon Terminators perfectly fit that bill. Here is a unit that's great for dealing with hordes, which is again a key weakness of the Custodes. So not a terrible unit by any means. Very good at killing hordes of infantry. And, they can fight other Terminators, they're solid in close combat. They're not a bad unit. But they also don't scream win at all costs either. And that's important. The psychological impact is important. Games Workshop themselves, of course, sell a 10-man Custodian squad. Ignore the price, it's Australian, it's terrible, we all know it. Now, this 10-man box gives you 2 5-man squads. It's up to you whether you want to go sword and board, or if you want to go for the spear. Personally, I would suggest 2 squads of 5 with spears, because the charge bonus does allow them to actually hurt things like Terminators. Otherwise, Terminators will lock the squad down and kill them very quickly. In fact, You really don't want to charge Terminators if you can avoid it, but if it's going to happen, charge them on your terms, use that higher initiative. Armies that predominantly are focused around Terminators in 30k will get the better of Custodes 9 times out of 10. That is the Achilles heel of the Custodes. But there are ways of mitigating that. Pride of the Legion forces do have their weaknesses, especially against Custode vehicles. As I say, my suggestion, 2 squads of 5 Custodians with spears is probably the fairest way to play the army. You can of course go for sword and board, or you can even go for swords and fists. But again, what seems right, what seems fair, you don't want to be trying to min-max everything. I think a balanced list is the best option. Keeping that in mind, another unit that I think is fantastic for any other army, but kind of mediocre for the Custodians, is the Sagittario Guard. Here you have a squad which is sort of a mix of 2 different types of Devastator Marines. They have a lot of shots and are essentially mobile heavy bolters on the one hand, but they can also be short-ranged anti-tank on the other. Up to you which one you pick, but they are something you hardly ever see, and they look great. So there again, another unit that I suggest. It gives you some more presence on the battlefield rather than just min-maxing the amount of tanks you can take to battle. Take some of these guys. They'll give you a few more numbers of infantry on the tabletop, and they look great, and again, they're good at dealing with things like hordes. Are they spectacular? Not by any means, but they're a fun and fair unit. Again, most Astartes players would kill to have them in their army. The last unit I suggest for the army is a Custodes grav tank, and just one. Why is this? Well, this is essentially the Custodian's version of a Sikaran tank. The only reason it's in the army is to provide some sort of anti-air firepower. That's pretty much it. It is a very strong vehicle, possibly to the point of being overpowered, but let's not kid ourselves. We're not trying to completely handicap this army. We want it to be able to take on all comers. This vehicle has decent ranged anti-tank, very good anti-infantry firepower, and, thanks to its twin-linked main weapons, can take down enemy aircraft. Is it adept at it? No, not at all. It will still be snap firing at them and struggle, but it's better than trying to fire at them with bolt guns off your regular Custodians. Fair enough? Alright, one last little thing to keep in mind when you're building a Custodian army is transfers. They have a beautiful transfer sheet. We all know what Forge World's like with last chance to buy, so you've probably only got 6 months more of this sheet before it goes out of production. So if you're thinking of collecting Custodians, now's the time to buy it. The same sheet also applies if you're collecting Sisters of Silence. Apart from it, that's all there is to it. So again, without all the rambling, a HQ choice of some description, some Aquilon Terminators, preferably with fire pikes, 10-man Custodian box, which will give you 2 5-man squads, a 5-man squad of Sagittario Guard, and a Custodes grav tank. And of course transfers. That will give you the core of an army, and it will give you games, is the most important thing. When you rock up with this sort of army list, people are not going to groan and roll their eyes at you. I think that's important. It's not just about how you feel playing the game, but the people around you. You've got to take that into consideration. Don't always go out there looking for that dick-kicking list. And today I've tried to show you a way of making a Custodian army that can and will win games, but is not going to make the person playing you get pissed off. Because Custodians, they have a pretty bad rap in 30k, and half of that's down to the players and how they build their armies. Very few players can rein in their own excesses. And I mean, the Astartes players are just as bad for it. How many times have we gone out there and seen it? I know I've personally seen it, an army of all tyrant siege terminators led by their Primarch with Domitar in it. That is just brutal. Same thing with Domitar, the Iron Warriors Castrum Ferrum, their own personal special Domitar, running around in Zone Mortalis. Overpowered and broken. People taking multiple Leviathan Dreadnoughts in games of Zone Mortalis. That's just like, what the hell were you thinking, you know? People have excesses. Custodian players, to be fair to them, it gets picked up on more because the army starts out as a broken mess. It's not necessarily their fault. So whatever they can do to mitigate that is in their best interests. Anyway, if this sounds like a real negative episode, I'm sorry for that. I'm not trying to make it negative. I'm just trying to ram home the point of why I'm doing it this way. And next time out, we're going to look at Sisters of Silence. And that's going to be a very different structure because they're a very different force, which is why I had to split them up in the first place. Anyway, Mac with the Outer Circle, thank you all for watching, and I'll see you all next time.